Welcome to Pacific Northwest Alutiiq Culture Camp 2021 Reawakening Ceremony. This is the Alutiiq naming panel discussion. Quyanaa for joining us for this event. Chamai, Kui, Heather Matrokin Quyannan. Pacific Northwest Culture Camp has been providing cultural connection to Alutiiq people since 2019 through the support of generous donors, including the Bristol Bay Native Corporation Education Foundation. BBNC Education Foundation has provided support for today's event, Quyanaa BBNCEF. Culture Camp is one way to provide community connection to Alutiiq people residing outside traditional homelands, and has become a way to not only provide community, but also build mentoring relationships, develop cultural teachers, pass on traditional knowledge, and nurture connections both in person and through online events. Although the world was reimagined in March of 2020, we moved Culture Camp online to provide encouragement in uncertain times. In this, our third year of Culture Camp, when we hoped to be meeting in person, we find ourselves once again with the need to protect our community as our priority by providing online events. A special thank you goes to our founding members, Ellie Dinglasa Stewart and Vicky Pakiskok Pankratz Era. Although we cannot meet in person, we continue building community and connection and providing opportunities to share and learn Alutiiq ways of being online at Pacific Northwest Culture Camp 2021 Reawakening Ceremony. Pacific Northwest Alutiiq Culture Camp strives to maintain a supportive learning environment, and we encourage everyone in attendance to listen and engage in a respectful manner. To encourage and build resiliency in our people, Culture Camp is excited to offer this cultural learning opportunity.
Quyanaa Heather, Chamai Hui Jessica, Towns Kamara, Uptahatna Palista. Our community members often bring us questions about naming protocol and ask us how to receive and give Sugpiaq names. We have gathered those questions to guide our discussion today. To address this need, we have asked a panel of experts and culture bearers to join with us to share their knowledge of Sugpiaq naming. It is my pleasure to introduce our panelists, Dr. Alisha Drabek, Dehrich Chya, and Hanna Sholl. Quyanaa for being here. Can you please introduce yourselves?
Chamai hui Alisha Drabek, Uptahatna Ahishak, Shunami Surlianga, Shunami Paktachtwa Jali. Ilanka Ahwa Nagamut. Chamai, my name is Alisha Drabek, and my Alutiiq name is Ahishak, which means the lookout. I was born and live and work here in Kodiak, Alaska. My family are the people of Afognak. Quyanaa.
Chamai hui Dehrich Chya Uptahatna Izuiq. Hui tsunami sulhanga angalilhanga kitjahwirmi. Ilan ka kiktarmiwat, nunya mute, uzenkar mute, kasukwar mute, li taminuk temot. Hello, my name is Dehrich Chya. My Sugpiaq name is Izuiq, which means seal. I was born in Kodiak and I grew up in the Anchorage area, but I have since moved back to Kodiak. And I work at the Alutiiq Museum as the Alutiiq Language and Living Culture Manager. My family's from Kodiak Island, from all over, from Old Harbor and Yuzinki and Akiak.
Chamai hui Hanna Sholl, Uptahatna Agashuk, Shunami Shullianga. My name is Hanna Sholl. My Alutiiq name is Agashuk, which means cormorant, and I was born in Kodiak.
Would you please share your personal naming story? And we can start with Alisha.
I actually have two Alutiiq names. My first name that was given to me by Phyllis Peterson was Angalachtak. And Angalachtak means the laugher. And as an early language apprentice and just my personality, my way of interacting with people, I smile all the time and I laugh regularly. And I think it brought a lot of joy and silliness to the master apprentice sessions. So Phyllis would laugh a lot watching me laugh, and then began referring to me as the laugher. So that became my name, Angalachtak. And then as years developed within the language movement, I had a number of other elders and learners who thought I should have a different name as well, something that, you know, solidified my role. And they ended up coming in place names research. We came upon the term for a location, its pilot point. It's called Alisha. And Alisha, it's in essence the lookout. And so the elders and learners at the time named me that. And I think also because my English name, Alisha, is similar to Alisha. So it has all just coalesced. And in essence, my names come to me because of my work within the language community.
Quyanaa. Derek, would you share your naming story?
Yeah, so my name actually came from my grandmother when I was like 11 or 12 years old, I don't remember. But yeah, my grandma gave me the name Izuip, which, like I said, means seal. And she said it's because I have big eyes like a seal. And that's the end of that story, really.
Hannah, would you please share your story?
Sure. I was, I think it was like 2013, 2014 maybe. And I'd been dancing for a little while and really involved in the dancers mostly and starting to learn the language. And Candace Branson came up to me and was like, I have a name for you, but I can't tell you. And I was like, okay, she making fun of me? Like, what's going on here? And she's like, I'm gonna talk to Maria about it. And I was like, oh, this is like a mean girl situation. Like, this is about to get real. And then a few days later, they came and they told me that they cleared it with the elders and that my name was going to be Arashuk. And it was gifted to me because of what I do in dance and the way that the birds are like graceful and whatnot. But also there's like some unique, like it has a unique ending on it, and there's like some mystery behind that. And I think Alisha actually knows more about it than I do. But that they gave me that because they felt that was appropriate. So there's actually a lot more that I want to learn about my name that I haven't had a chance to do. But it wasn't a mean girl situation. I was really grateful for that. And yeah, I was really, really honored to receive that.
Absolutely. I would add just to what Hanna said, the cormorants, the skin of the cormorants, you know, the feathers are black and yet iridescent greens and purples and just lovely colors, and some of the finest sewn garments from our ancestry show that. And so your work in their culture and artistry with the colors that you use and the sewing and weaving and other, you know, Alutiiq traditions, it just seemed to erupt as wow, that's such a perfect name to give you.
Thank you for sharing that. I would like to share a two-part question. Could you please discuss with us what is known about bestowing or gifting of names in the pre-Russian time period? And is there information on the types of names given, such as familial names or other names? Let's start with Derek.
That's a good question. There's not a whole lot of information on like names prehistory, and like the majority of the names that I've seen that are like pre-colonial names are in stories. So like old like legends and that sort of thing. And a lot of the legends that we have were written by people who didn't know anything about our language. And so the way that those names are written down, it's like really hard to tell what those names even like could have possibly have been. But there are a couple that I have come across from more recent stories that were told in the 1970s, where the names are pretty clear. And they're stories told by either Fedosia Lektonen or a woman named Katya E. from Karluk. It's the way that information's written down, it's kind of hard to tell who was speaking. But the name that I heard are Saqumihi, which sounds like it could come from the root for bird, but doesn't have like a clear translation. And then Aktingok is the other one, and I have no idea what that could mean. But I've always been interested in like finding out like what names could have been like long ago, like are they old, like words that don't have a clear like translation in our language, but did, you know, thousands of years prior, or if they had a more deeper meaning that our people we just don't understand anymore. Yeah, I really don't know. But I do know that like namesakes were pretty common. So like people would be named after like a relative who'd recently passed away, and that sort of thing. Alisha or Hannah, do either of you have any more to add?
Well, I agree with what Dehrich said, and I've come across other names in, so Dr. Jeff Lear, as he interviewed elders, there were many years that he would come out to Digafognak or come to the villages prior to Digafognak and interview elders. And so there's names just tucked in here or there in stories. And over the years, at one point I had a lovely list, which I can no longer find after computer transfers, but there was, you know, maybe 100 names that I'd come upon. And now I only have a few handful of those traditional names that, you know, Dehrich referenced. And some of the ones that I've heard of are animal-based names, which Derich's Alutiiq name and Hannah's Alutiiq name are both animal-based names. There was an elder that was called Quyannasinaq. His name was Nick Wolkoff, and that means wolf. So it's a good example of that, just the simple voice of that word. There was another old man, Tashwak, went by Sanangjuk. Is that the one that you mentioned, Eric? I think means maybe a little tail or bird in relation to that. And there was a great story by Ralph Demidov told in the 60s about a whaler, and his family had traditional names. And so reading about his history, he had the daughter of a whaling shaman. So I believe it was in that family. Her name was Unina, and it was fluted breast of a gray whale. And so the whaling specific terms for a family that was, you know, by heritage, whaling shamans. And then there was certainly other healers that I've heard of. Apashuchu was dear grandfather, which is the name of an old healer. These are all names that I've listed in an article that I'd written about naming practices that I'll share the link to if you haven't already read it. But there were others that I remember as well. And but as I've researched Yupik traditions, and because we are such close cousins to the Central Yupik, their naming practices, because they've also only been colonized over a little over 100 years, it's much less of a, you know, time period as opposed to our 230 years of colonization on Kodiak. And so the traditions of naming practices, I think, have you know, certainly been impacted by the length of time since colonization. And in the Yupik tradition, from what I've read and heard from Yupik friends, that naming practices, that babies are often named after deceased family members or community leaders or people in the community that are significant to the family who have recently died. And the name is often not said after the person passes, so that the name is preserved and that the spirit of that person is put to rest. And when the new baby is born, they're given that name, and it's really tied into the reincarnation beliefs, which I find it interesting. The research in our region, there's an article that the Alutiiq Museum did about the word name, atak, and that's a great item to read if you haven't. It's in the archive for the Alutiiq Word of the Week. And in there, we reference that there isn't a direct tie to reincarnation, but I think that this reference to the Yupik tradition, I believe that it is the naming of people after those who've passed. And I do have some friends who've been gifted names from elders, and I think it leans towards this more traditional practice of them naming them after their grandfather. You know, it might be a woman, but she gets the name of her grandfather because that's the embodiment of that person that the elder remembers and wants to carry forward. So I think there's definitely a connection to family. And then I also feel like in today's Alutiiq world, anywhere on the planet, wherever we may live, but particularly on the island, giving nicknames and namesakes and such is so common. Even in English, it's a tradition that has translated outside of the Alutiiq language. And so my family, most of my cousins, my dad, all of our family have other nicknames that usually tied to their, behavior, something that they did that struck the family at the time, and it's carried into adulthood. Other times it transitions. And then I also think that the tradition of not just babies' names and those processes, but the songs that get attached to an infant, that grandparents, and there's a tie to that. I just wanted to reference baby songs because I think that it's such a wonderful tradition for grandparents and aunties and uncles to sing a nonsense sounding, just random sometimes words that please and tickle that child, and it becomes the song that carries throughout their life. I just think that's really special. And I have other thoughts on some other, I guess the word Mrs. Is another thing I think is interesting to hear elders in those early recordings of interviews with elders who were raised in the language and in traditions. You'll often hear them refer to someone's wife by the husband's first name and then hija at the end. So like Tikan's wife, Tikanija. And I don't know, Dehrich, if you have thought about this, but Nuliha is his wife. And so I think it's an interesting way of taking a possessiveness of the woman and representing her in connection to her husband. So it's interesting how Mrs. has carried on in the Alutiiq language, and you still hear elders will occasionally say that. Those are my thoughts on what I know of our traditional naming practices, and I feel like we've, although transitioned, so much has stayed the same and being Anglicized, and now we're sort of switching back and trying to re-Aluticize it again. And I think one other thing I could share before I turn it over to my panel partners is the Alutiiq people typically only gave one name. It was a single name for a person. We didn't have last names like you do surnames in English or patronymics as you have in Russian. There was one name for a person, and then you find that some of our Alutiiq families have carried on that name of that original ancestor who had that name during the time of colonization and change. So Yakinak is a local family name that is a pretty large family, but hopefully people recognize that name. And that is a definite Alutiiq name of an ancestor that was called Yakunak, which means the reacher. And I just think that's so cool that the ancestor's name is preserved, and as the family then moved into an English or American society, they carried that name forward, and all of their family members took that as their last name, which is different than the Russian last names that even people, Alutiiq people that may not even have Russian heritage, ended up with Russian names because they were baptized by a Russian of that last name, and they received their last name that way. So very complex process, our naming and its history.
Yeah, Quyanaa, Alisha, that was wonderful. I before this, I brushed up on the article that Alisha wrote because it was so. I remember there was so much information, and it was wonderful. And I read the thing about the Quyannasinaq last name, which is something that I didn't know, because my grandpa's a Quyannasinaq, and so I was like, oh, that's so special. But there's so much. The other stuff that I just brushed up on before coming here was I just kind of looked through the journals that I have about what was mentioned, and so there wasn't a lot documented on pre-contact naming, but right around the early 1800s, Gideon did note about birthing practices, and in there he did note that after a baby was born and after the midwife was complete with the ceremony of bringing the baby into the world, by agreement between the husband and wife, if the infant was male, he would be honored with a name of a grandfather or father or close kinsman or friend, and then the same if it was female. If the infant was female, being honored by a grandmother, mother, kinswoman, or friend. And we heard in what was talked about here that that's not necessarily gender specific. It could have been honoring, you know, a daughter by a grandfather's name. We see that passed on, and actually traditionally in my family, my mom did that with a lot of my siblings. My brother, I have a brother, Ed, who's named after Edna, my grandma, and a brother, Phil, who's named after Phyllis, his grandma. And so we see that tradition kind of carrying on organically, which is really neat after studying more about the history. There was just a couple other things that I thought it was important to note, that the importance of naming, or at least the importance of naming being a component in what would take place. So it talks about specifically, there was information about the leadership and how that at such times women were not allowed to be present in this certain area, except for the girls who had been given male names and were brought up as sons. So we see like the element of adding that male name is an important element. And then we also, of course, see it in the, where we're talking about children who were designated by their parents at birth, who were male, and were given female names and then raised up as and trained appropriately as a female, and then were apprenticed by shamans for that position. So we see how the crossover of names is intricate and complicated and beautiful. And then there was one kind of sad element that I saw. I really was trying to make a connection of when traditional names dropped off. So a lot of times we can see where the discussion kind of changes. And I was only able to find one like little piece, and it talks about how at the time when Kodiak, indigenous Kodiak, ancestral Kodiak had become a complex society and had their own versions of slaves and people in charge. And then when the Russians came, there was a process that took place that many of those slaves amongst the chaos actually fled to search for better treatment under Russians. And the Russian would accept them, of course, and as former, and then protect them and use them as bodyguards. And then when the Russians had later found this firm foothold on the neck of Kodiak indigenous people, they took all those slaves, and it says directly that the slaves then lost their names, and they were all named this one name, which basically meant daily wage worker or worker. And so you see like that pull out of the importance of naming identities as we name females and males, and they're passed down from generations and gifted in ceremony. And then all of a sudden it's like, it's also used as something to deplete and destroy and dismantle as it's ripped away.
Very interesting. Thank you, all of you. That was very interesting and very enlightening as well. Quyanaa.
So the next question is, what, if any, were the impacts to traditional naming from religion or religious doctrine? And I don't know who wants to go first, maybe Dehrich?
Sure. So I think that we've touched on this a little bit already, but Sugstun or Alutiiq names were pretty early on, like cast aside in favor of like more Western naming practices. It was very common for people to either get like a baptismal Orthodox name that became their first name, and then their native name turned into their last name, like Alisha had mentioned with Quyannasinaq. But it was also very common to just do away with the native name entirely and also get Russian surnames. So you see a lot of that here in Kodiak, like Semyonov, and I don't know if there are any around, but I know Shelikov was a surname in the area as well. And it's certainly not just in Kodiak and other parts of the state as well that happened very commonly. So yeah, just that. I think that pretty early on with the introduction of Orthodoxy, people were given their baptismal names and also given Western surnames, which is one of the reasons I think, there's so little information about traditional Alutiiq names, is because naming was one of the early things to sort of leave our culture, I think.
Yeah, I agree with what Dehrich shared, and I could just add that what I said earlier about reincarnation as a belief practice, that the justification in a family's mind as to why they were naming their child after a family member, and the belief that a person actually may be re-embodying or connected again to that child. I think that with Russian Orthodoxy's arrival, that also diminished, and it may have played a part in not carrying on those traditional naming of the members that had been deceased. And I know the elders that I find to be perhaps the most devout Russian Orthodox, none of them have Alutiiq names. So I think it's very much true that the Russian church name, and often they prefer to go by the Russian church name, and their English name is a derivation of that or a shortened form of that. And so I think it very much has to do with religious belief systems.
I don't have a lot to add other than an experience that we had together, as far as it was when our ancestors' bones from a certain area were being repatriated. I don't remember the specifics, but I do remember that it was at the cemetery, and the Alutiiq dancers, there was a select few of us who were asked to come and greet them. And then the Russian Orthodox priest was also there, and it was, he said the ceremony for it, I'm not sure what that entailed, but he did list the names, and all of the names were those were Russian gifted baptismal names, and they repeated themselves fairly often. And I remember it striking me as even during this time frame that all the traditional names were gone, and that were all baptismal names at that point.
Kind of as a follow-up question to that, or just something that it's making me think, is how did the introduction then of like patronymic names affect the societal structure of the Alutiiq people?
That's a tough question. I don't know if Dehrich or Hannah have a response, but I would think that the patronymic structure, I don't hear that continued in the way that I have heard our elders talk. I don't hear it, them using the traditional Russian patronymic structure. I mean, I studied Russian in college. It was actually one of my early majors. And so after 5 semesters, I was able to speak Russian, and that experience actually carried on into me being able to be a better Alutiiq speaker, since like a quarter of our words, anything modern, comes from Russia. But you don't see the you know, the patronym in Russian, you would name a daughter. So Simon's daughter would be Semyonovna, and the son Semyonov. So the practice of that is an English version of naming continues. So like Dehrich mentioned, one Russian name, you know, or Chichinov or Zharov, some of the different Russian names that are, you know, Kodiak based. I don't see it carrying forward as a Russian tradition of naming patronymically.
The only thing I have to add about it is another anecdote. My own family's history. My great grandpa his name was Jacob Semyonov, and I recently, within the last couple of months, learned that Semyonov wasn't his birth surname. His name was Jacob Ayagusha, and his dad was named Simeon Ayagusha. And as he grew older, for some reason, it's unclear if it was because of the church or just his own personal preference, or maybe his dad had passed away and he wanted to honor him in some way. But he had changed his name from Ayagusha, which is, to me, is clearly a Alutiiq name, to Semyonov. And I know that there are a couple other cases where something similar had happened, like with Larry Matfei's family. Their last name from, you know, so far back was Nangkok, which is translated as like a sailor, I guess. And then they changed their last name to Matfei because one of their relatives was named Matfei, and I think he'd passed away, and so the family changed their last name, perhaps to honor them, or for some other reason that I'm not, you know, sure about. But so stuff like that did happen. But I don't know if that necessarily follows the Russian naming practices, or more of an Alutiiq style, like Alutiiq variation of Russian naming practices, maybe, where you're changing your name to honor somebody who recently passed away.
So we've talked a little bit about the past and what we know or don't know about that. There seems like there's lots of information that we don't have, but there's been a cultural revival of sorts. So how have names been gifted or bestowed since the cultural revival time period? Alisha, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, the cultural revival has been going on, you know, really since the 70s and 80s, right after ANCSA, and particularly during the formation of the island-wide Kodiak Alutiiq dance group, and having representatives from so many different villages participate in that and perform traditional songs and make new songs. And I think that as that grew, and then we've had our first Master Apprentice program, all of the apprentices were really eager to have Alutiiq names, and we didn't follow a practice like we do today that we've developed over time. They just sort of emerged during the Master Apprentice sessions, that the elder that they were working with just thought, oh, this person seems like this, and then they gave them their name. And so it took time, and it really did focus on who as an adult you are and some of your qualities, and choosing a word that elder knew that they thought represented that person. And then as the movement has grown and we've developed youth programming and educational classes, you know, formalized Alutiiq learning, I think that it's transitioned into a much more, you know, we can give people names in a shorter period of time, and a process of having a conversation as a talking circle. So in an elders work session, what I've seen happen in a number of different programs is we'll gather the elders, we'll talk about the participants that are in the program or the class, and they generally have had experience with them, so they know who they are, or we'll show a picture of them and we'll talk about what we know about those people. And in English, we'll talk about some of their qualities and things that we think really stand out, or who they're related to, and the elders, it'll trigger, you know, sometimes it'll take it off in another direction. We might, as English second language speakers, come in with, oh, we want to name them something that means this quality or this animal name because of, you know, this experience with them. And then the elder will say, oh, but I remember the grandmother and she had a beautiful name, and it was. And so it is an organic process that's difficult to, you know, rush, and yet it's gotten easier for our elders and they're more comfortable, you know, our first language speakers in hearing those qualities, remembering those pieces, and then names. And we've kind of created ceremonies out of it where I think in Digafognak, and in the Alutiiq language high school class that I used to teach with Candace Franson, we would make little name cards and have a PowerPoint with the name. So as we bestow, you know, we'll flick the PowerPoint and up comes the name, and we'll repeat it and have them record it, because sometimes it can be difficult as a learner to, you know, bestow this beautiful name, maybe you say it just right, and then after you leave, the memory of how to pronounce it correctly leaves you. And so audio recording that has been a critical process. I've had people reach back out and say, I don't have my recording, I don't know how to say my name, and, you know, resend them their name said as I've heard it from our elders. And I think that process, you see it in, if anybody's watched the wonderful film Keep Talking, there's a naming ceremony that we did out at Digafognak there, and the conversations around some of those children that, you know, what names that we knew they wanted. There's a wonderful scene in there where one young gal is expressing her wish for a name, and then in the end we give her a different name. And I thought they did that so beautifully, because there was this moment of disappointment that you see on that young person's face, and then later she comes into her own and recognizes that it was just the right name for her. And so I'm always touched by that process, and I think that's what cultural revitalization or cultural repatriation is all about, is trying to remake a process. But it also doesn't mean that families can't, you know, we don't have to have a formal elders group, working group gather together. I've also done my own traditional naming within my own family. My kids, all three of my sons have Alutiiq names. One of them was bestowed by an elder. Uduk is my baby. He is, his English name is actually Finnish, Tavi, and Uduk is a red sea urchin because his hair stuck up quite boldly when he was an infant. And so she just always called him that when we got together, and it stuck. And then my other two sons, I named them for qualities. One is very musically talented. I called him Chauyaista, a musician or drummer, you know, musically inclined. That's Theo. And then my second son, Fade, he climbed the walls and ran on windowsills and jumped off of countertops. So we called him Mayuchta because he was always the climber. And it's a good name to continue. So they evolve both in a structured, formalized way and in a family-based, natural way. And either way is fine. You know, your Alutiiq identity is your own. And so that's my thoughts on how we've evolved.
Quyanaa, for that. Derek, is there anything you would like to add?
Yeah, really just to tack on to the very end of Alisha's statement about, you know, Alutiiq identity is one of the issues that comes up a lot is like, oh, but are we doing it traditionally? And I take issue with that only because, like, you know, we're still Alutiiq people and we're still alive and we still do things in a certain way. And the way that we do things is the Alutiiq way because we're Alutiiq people. And I think it's important for people to realize that, you know, the way that we give people names is the way that Alutiiq people are doing it. I just think that's important for people to understand, is because, you know, we can create our own naming traditions. They don't have to be ancient and all of that. So
thank you for that, Derek. That is a wonderful sentiment. Hanna, would you like to pipe in at all?
Sure. Yeah. What Derek just said, I just want to echo that. That's something that I have to address frequently. As an artist, I get the question, but is it traditional Alutiiq art? And in the beginning, that really was discouraging. And my mom, you know, that mom's wisdom was like, you're Alutiiq. It's traditional. And so yeah, same with the naming. It's really good to hear that, because we hear that a lot, especially with speaking with people who aren't plugged into the language movement yet, and so don't have other resources for finding names. It's good to hear people in our community not give permission, but just kind of remind us that we are Alutiiq and that this is our culture, and it is inherent in us. I did want to say also from Alisha's, I have my kids' little note card from their naming ceremony with Candace, and just share a little bit about their experience, because they all have Alutiiq names that were gifted by through the nest and through like the dancers, and the elders met and they all came together during one ceremony. Actually, everyone in my family, including my mom, got named at that one ceremony. And my son, Aningachbak, which he loved that right off the bat. It means older brother. And so he's really embraced it. And my other children really haven't. My youngest is Chawyachta, because he was just our little drummer. He always, especially when he was really little and would be dancing with me, he would have his little drum. And then my other two just kind of weren't interested. And so today I actually had the conversation with my daughter, and her name is Aurora. And I was like, hey, I found your card with your Alutiiq name on it, and this is what it means, and this is how you say it. And she was like, no, my name is Aurora. Can you say Aurora in Alutiiq, Mom? And so I'm like, okay. And I'm like texting, do you think this is okay? And it's funny because her Alutiiq name is Umyakspaq. And when it was gifted to her as a strong mind. And so I was told it's very appropriate for her to want her English name to be translated into Alutiiq. And we see that, like, we have members in our dance group who their name is one thing and it directly translates to something in Alutiiq. And so people call them that, and that's fine too. And my husband's name, which I thought was really neat, because as like Alisha was talking about how not the first Alutiiq name, but the second Alutiiq name, it sounds similar to her name, and that makes it extra special. My husband is kind of the same way, because his Alutiiq name is Ukiskak, and which is knowledgeable and capable man, and he is a locksmith. So it was really easy for him to remember Ukiskak because of that and that like natural connection. So those are just the fun little connections that I have with my family and their little naming in present day. And we will, you know, trying to reawaken that ceremony organically within our children, but also realizing that like they have their own identities, and I don't need to force them to have an Alutiiq name. Like my daughter, she loves her name. And so you know, just being patient with them and trying to create an atmosphere where this will be organic with their family as they grow, as they choose, I think is probably the biggest kind of like revolution, when I'm like, of course, why wouldn't you want your Alutiiq name? Everyone wants their Alutiiq name. And then to have my children's independence stand in the way, it was refreshing and a reminder about how we are Alutiiq. It's our culture. That is who we are, whether we decide to embrace a name, whether we've been gifted a name or had the opportunity or not.
Thank you for that, Hannah. Thank you for sharing that about Aurora. That's wonderful.
I would love to add, as you guys were talking, I was thinking about some of the structures of names that we've used with the elders that it may be helpful. And I think, you know, looking towards how this gets more, you know, formalized as far as a reference or resource for people. I think some of the names that got shared have the skak ending. And so you can pretty much take, you know, any verb and add that. It's like one who does that, you know. So there's endings in Alutiiq like skak or tulik is another, ta or ista, some of these endings that take a verb and transition it into being a noun. And that's been the difficulty, I think, in some of the early naming, when we would come with a verb or a concept, and then the elders would change it back into, to make it into a noun so that it was a person, could be a person's name. And I think that that's important to be aware of, that parts of speech and the linguistic structure I've had, when I presented, how about these names, I've had elders say, that doesn't sound right, because you wouldn't call a person that. So there's a little bit about language learning that I think is useful to know those things. But again, when they give us the names of some of the ancestors or elders they knew, some of their names, they don't even know what they mean. So as Dehrich spoke about earlier, they're ancient words that perhaps were so resounding to be that person, then it made it confusing to talk about that concept or that thing. And so choosing a word or a name that's not going to, as you speak Alutiiq, get confusing as to what you talk about in a normal daily occurrence, I guess.
Very interesting. Thank you. Thank you for adding that.
Yeah, that really makes me reflect on this past year. You know, my mom and my sister and I, we've really been going through some different things, you know, with the naming process, and, you know, needing to know more information, and how do we create maybe more ceremony in the process. And so part of that process was I wrote to Dehrich at the Alutiiq Museum because we didn't really know, are these okay names? Are they not okay names? And so then, yeah, so we wrote to him, and he would send me very lovely emails back, and he would say, oh, that's definitely not okay. You can't do that, but you can do this. This would be a better way to make that into a name. And yeah, he really helped to steer us in the right direction. I really appreciate Dehrich and the Alutiiq Museum. The other thing that we did in preparation is I carved a nanik, and actually I have that here. So I have this nanik, and it's a diving whale nanik. And so that was the first one that I carved, and I did that with the help of Hanna. And you know, she gave me a lot of instruction and stuff to help me do that. And it was a nice way to get ready and prepared, and also just a way to incorporate sort of new ceremony into the process. So it was really fun. How can Alutiiq Sugpiaq people help to reawaken naming and gift or bestow names in an organic manner? Hanna, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think we've talked a lot about this and definitely touched on it. And I think just reiterating that, you know, we are Alutiiq, we are Sugpiaq in present day, and culture isn't a stagnant thing. It is ever growing and changing. And because our culture is alive, that we have the ability to do those sort of things, like seek out Alutiiq names and name our children and encourage our families to make their traditions. And I love your tradition around your nanik and turning that into a naming ceremony. I think that was beautiful. And so along those paths, I think that that's a good way to look at it. I do hear a lot, and I do feel this a lot too on other subjects, is that we're at a point where we may feel like we need permission from our own community, not so much as others, but from our own other Alutiiq people and other people in our community. And I know that I've felt it with other subjects of that feeling of like, oh no, am I being judged because I'm not doing it right? But I don't know who to ask to do it right. And so I think that as culture bearers and educators and those who have the knowledge behind language, I think it's good to like what we're seeing here is like I said, not giving permission, but understanding that there's other ways to do this and that it doesn't have to follow this rigid ancestral piece element that we might not have access to.
That's a really good point, Hannah. And I think the other thing that is a very stark reality for us, you know, those of us who've been spending time with elders, for first language speakers, there are still very few of them, and we have lost many in the last year. And since I started learning Alutiiq, the long list of what we're friends is gotten quite small of first language speakers. And so that is a very sad transition, because I normally in my past and my early days as a learner would not, you know, if I was editing something or coming up with a name suggestion, I wouldn't dare say it or share it until I went and talked to an elder. And at a certain point, we will have no more first language speakers, with the exception of those young people that if families take our language, you know, the care of it and raise up their babies that way, you know, we can again regain it, but it's a definite impact on naming. And I think, as Hannah and also Dehrich talked about, it's empowering your identity. And if it's nothing more than sharing it with other family members and reaching out to second language learners to, you know, get some feedback on language pronunciation or spelling or right endings, you know, that could be helpful in a way of giving you a sense of affirmation. But it should also make you feel empowered, and that although our elders have, you know, many have passed, they've also given us so many gifts, and we have this opportunity to honor that and to not let it lay stagnant just because it's hard.
Kind of in the same vein, if you will, how can we empower Alutiiq Sugpiaq people to embrace the gifting of names as a connection to culture, to our culture?
Sure. I think this again comes around to the idea that, you know, we are Alutiiq people, and therefore we have the ability to, you know, give Alutiiq names as part of who we are. And yeah, I mean, again, I think, you know, we've touched on this a bit on earlier questions as well, but yeah, that idea again that, you know, the way that we do things as Alutiiq people is Alutiiq tradition and Alutiiq culture and Alutiiq identity. And I understand the desire to like go back and find how things were done, because I do that too, but I don't think we should also like at the same time let it stop us. Like if we can't find any information about how things used to be done, do them anyway, and that's how things are done. I think that's important for people to understand.
Thank you, Dehrich. I love that. Do it anyway. Hannah, is there anything you would like to add to that?
Just echoing that. I mean, yeah, do it anyway. I really like that. I think that's an important notion. Do it anyway. Keep it alive anyway. Make your own traditions, ceremonies.
Keep it alive. I love that. Alisha?
I couldn't say it any better. That's very, very good.
Awesome. It was. Thank you. Thank you for that.
All right, so another question, and this is pretty important. I remember Hannah telling me a while ago that there are some names that are not acceptable to become names. There are some animals that mean other things, and so you wouldn't want to use those. So are there acceptable names and unacceptable names? And has anyone in the community thought about creating a naming resource where it's a compiled list of these things with how to pronounce them and all of that. And I don't know, is that something that's been thought about in the community, and maybe where could that be housed?
So I think with something like that, with a naming resource, the fear that I would have is that it would like kind of box us into that. Not that that would be the purpose of creating it or anything, but I think that it could pretty easily transform into like, oh, these are the names that we should use, as opposed to these are a list of ideas. The thing with naming and even like taboos is like taboos change over time. Anything could become like unacceptable given enough time. So I think it would be hard to identify what those are because things can change, and because something else could become a euphemism for some, for an action or something like that. So I don't know of any naming resource, a guideline or anything like that that's been attempted to be made, other than like maybe people making their own lists of names that they've found referenced and things like that from stories or narratives and that sort of thing.
Quyanaa for sharing that. Dehrich, does anyone else want to jump in?
I would add, I think I've mentioned earlier about endings to consider, and I think that would probably be helpful to have some basic understanding of noun-verb structures and or adjectives. I mean, we don't have adjectives in Alutiiq, but you can make a word that functions like an English adjective, and I think that could be very helpful. I agree with Dehrich that creating a strict, form that it might inhibit people, and some of the best names have come from just really creative places, and are the elders, as we got together for the New Words Council, this is just a sort of similar, because it's naming objects as opposed to people. I mean, yeah, objects instead of people. There were a lot of names in the early days where they were very much trying to just describe the object very literally. And as our naming of objects and the New Words Council developed, the level of creativity wove into that. And I think that's something beautiful. We also, over the last, maybe the last year or so that it was a formal meeting time, we sometimes get together still, but there were words that had two Alutiiq portions of Alutiiq words that were melded together to form one concept and then have another ending. And so it was really creative ways. And as far as taboo words, I would say that there are certain animal names and that have, connotations that it would be unfortunate to get a name gifted that also is a name for private parts, something like that. You have to sort of think about the connotations of some of our words, what they mean culturally also. And there's also what, in English we have homonyms. Well, in Alutiiq you have homonyms. So they're words that mean different things for different contexts. And there are also pronunciations that are harder for English speakers to say. That might be a reason to choose not to name yourself or your family member that, certain letters, but I don't think that should give away with those letters, because then we will lose the quality of our language. But there are, in naming sessions when we'll come in with a suggestion and you say a word and then the elders will start giggling. And so you're like, oh, there's something wrong here, And so researching the similarity of pronunciation and the meanings of the word can be really important.
Quyanaa, that's very enlightening. Well, Hanna, do you have anything to throw into the mix there?
Yeah, I think I like the idea of some sort of naming resource. It would be really neat, a more advanced level to kind of take it on and create a cheat sheet for more advanced levels. Like, these are things to consider. Like, that's not a sheet that I could look at and interpret. I'm not there in my language, but I think that Dehrich and Alisha could do that and come up with a sheet that be like, okay, instead of it just being a random thing, like how do we help people create these names, or if they at least say, you know, I would like to do a name for my daughter and she's this and this and this, and then there's a guideline to help us as those of us who are earlier in our language progress move forward, and we can help continue, but also not boxing us in with a specific list, because I do hear how that could definitely stifle the process, basically.
Yeah. When you mentioned that, Hannah, it reminded me in the high school class, one of the activities that we started there, I think, and then we carried it into Digafognet with kids, is we give them a piece of paper, and I had it drawn into 4 quadrants. And I can't remember what all 4 quadrants are, but I'll dredge it up. I know that one is you drew a picture of your family and you wrote your family names. And so it was them thinking about who their family is currently, or ancestors, grandparents, who they came from. And then another was some of the qualities, like descriptions. What are some adjectives you can describe yourself that you're known for amongst your friends? So people would put, I'm quiet, or I'm studious, or I'm, you know, noisy, or whatever the qualities are. And then there was another quadrant for your favorite activities. So, you know, the kids loved drawing pictures of them playing different ball sports, you know, and dancing or art, or, you know, some qualities like that. And for the life of me, I can't remember what the 4th quadrant is. Maybe it'll come to me, but I don't know if either of you have seen that. Actually just found a bunch of them from students the other day in a file.
That sounds really neat. I like that idea.
So we have one question, and it has sort of been answered, but I would like to ask, do you know of resources? So I know there's not a naming resource per se, but what types of resources could someone use if they were trying to creatively come up with a name with their elders along with their family? What resources would you suggest? And that might be a publication, but it might be somewhere, an organization. I know Jessica has relied on Dehrich. Dehrich, do you want to start?
Sure. Some of the,
they will contact you.
Yes, feel free to contact me. I work at the Alutiiq Museum. You can find my email on the Alutiiq Museum's website. But the museum's website is actually one of the things that I wanted to suggest because of the Alutiiq Word of the Week archive. So the museum's website is www.alutiiqmuseum.org. And on there you can find lists of publications that the museum has published, links to our online language archive, and then the Alutiiq Word of the Week archive, which will soon start its 24th season. And so it's like 24 years of Alutiiq language, like words and lessons that people can use to get more information about a certain topic, or just hear pronunciations of words. Another great resource is alutiiqlanguage.org, which has an online dictionary that you can like search, and it's got tons and tons of Alutiiq words. And a lot of them also have pronunciation guides, so you can click a play button and hear a speaker say the word so you can hear how it's pronounced. I think those are the 2 big resources that I would suggest. If anybody else has anything, by all means.
Quyanaa, Dehrich. Alisha, do you have anything to add?
Sure, I agree with every item that Dehrich was saying. And if the dictionary, I think, is the easiest to navigate, like he's saying, with the clickable pronunciation. But the picture dictionary in publication also could be useful because it's indexed in many different ways, and each page you can sort of look at like animals, and that was the 4th category, by the way, your favorite animal. That I was trying to remember. And I think learning the language is another access point. Taking a class, gives you exposure to the, there's grammar books, there's the orthography, there's things that you can, resources, many books and resources that you can listen to or look through. And by having an introduction to our language, it will teach you proper pronunciation of those words, and it becomes more fluid for you, as well as just having those creative sparks. I'm a believer of serendipity or synchronicity, that things happen for a reason, and that as an image or an idea or a word or a concept comes at you, it might be just the right thing for the moment. And so I think naming practices follow that, and immersing yourself in it is the best way to move forward, I think.
I love that. Thank you. Hanna?
Yes, I was pulling out my picture dictionary. This is great. It's a great resource. I reference it a lot because of the way it's set up. Quyanaa, Alisha, you're brilliant. You can see how approachable it is in finding what you would like. And then the back, it has the Alutiiq to English and then English to Alutiiq. So you can search. It's wonderful. Also, depending on where you're at in your language learning, or like if you are taking a class and you want to know all of the reasons for things, the classroom grammar book. And it's intimidating and not if you're beginning, but it's really also exciting if you can find a concept and learn about it that way. And if you don't have access to someone who will teach you or who can teach you. And then WordWiiNaq or wiiNaq.org, WIINAQ.org, is another search engine. It's generated, so there are issues in it sometimes, but for general learning. And then honestly, combining all of those is probably where I've had the best success, and then taking it to someone like Dehrich. And then for me, I learned through song, and so I find pronunciation and stuff was really helpful for me to learn by learning the songs, which is on alutiiqlanguage.org. There's also a song section there that has the songs being sung, and then the Alutiiq dancers have a YouTube that they have a lot of songs there, and then there's also, and then we also have the tiny dancers through there that we talk a little bit more about language and slow down the pace. So it's exciting because there's tons of resources out there, and now more so than ever, because of the hard work that our teachers and learners have done over the last 15 years, 20 years, something like that. So and I know that a lot of people use the Alutiiq Museum as a great way to connect to those resources. So that is also an excellent resource. So they're out there. That's the main takeaway. You have a lot of different formats that you can learn from. And also we've got language classes that are going on through SUNAC. Natalia Schneider, she teaches a language class every Tuesday, I believe. And then the college classes, which are online, and I think Alutiiq Language 2 is going on right now. So the opportunities are out there and the resources are many. And if you have any questions, I'm sure you can, reach out to us, reach out to the Alutiiq Museum. Don't get discouraged. There's people out there to help, I promise.
Thank you for that, Hanna and Alisha and Dehrich as well. Thank you for sharing those resources. I'm sure they'll be very helpful.
I just want to thank you guys, not just for coming here and being with us today and sharing your knowledge, but for dedicating your lives to doing this work. What you guys do affects me and so many other Sugpiaq people every single day. And what you do is very meaningful. What you guys do is just really, really amazing and it's very meaningful. You guys bring a lot of richness, and I really appreciate each of you.
And we couldn't bring culture camp to our community without you. So Quyanaa.
Quyannasinaq.
Why did you want to get an Alutiiq name? Did you initiate it?
I had said that I wanted one, but I didn't know how to get one since all my elders that could name me, that I felt like could name me, were no longer around. And so that was when Hanna and Dehrich and even Jessica got in on it a little bit. Went to April and asked for some about names, and took it through the ask for the advice of the elder council and at the Alutiiq Museum, and they came up with Sugpiaq,
Okay.
and which means one who is wise. And it was given to me at was it informational meeting or is it annual? Yeah,
Annual meeting.
annual meeting by Hanna and Dehrich.
Yeah, I have a video of it actually. I can play it right now.
Okay.
Considered Northwest Alutiiq Week. It was a wild success, and the birth of that came from Vicky Era, who we would like to bestow an Alutiiq name upon. We met with our elders in Kodiak and shared her amazing attributes as a mother, as an artist, as a culture bearer, as a teacher, and they came up with a name for her.
The name our elders at our elder session in Kodiak came up with for you is Sugpiaq. And Sugpiaq means one who's wise. And they gave that name to you because of all the teaching and sharing and holding on of knowledge that you've done throughout your life. So we're honored to share that name with you. And again, that name is Sugpiaq. Quyannasinaq.
Quyanaa.
Makes my heart feel good.
Yeah, it's neat to see little Emmy there too.
Yeah.
So anyway, after that, I decided that I wanted to give my children names and my grandchildren too. But first of all, I wanted to give Rana and Brandy names, and so I gave it lots of prayer and lots of thought, and then I didn't know whether to go with animal name or, because I know so many do, or some other name, but it was easier for me to find animals and check out what their qualities were. And so that's why I came up with Aknak for Rana, which is the sea otter. And because it has so many qualities that I see in Rana, she's very, very precious, just like sea otters are. We use every part of them, and but also just their habits of, they seem to want to take care of each other, and you know, and even holding the hands when they're sleeping on top of the water, and the way they take care of their babies, and they're very innovative and curious, and seem to be really go-getters, and they just do what they need to do. And so that's why I named her that. And then with Brandy, I named her Alutiiq, which is beaver. And there again, I did the research on that one too, and the skin and fur being so cherished and valuable, and because these girls are both so valuable to me, and I think to the world. But also the beaver is really protective and smart as far as the, always building and rebuilding the dams and making sure that their children and their house is safe. And they plan ahead and they gather their food for the winter for their babies, and that's so they'd have food. And they're just so protective and family oriented, and just keep right at it. They're very steadfast, but they can be fierce too. So that was how I came up with the name of Alutiiq. And then so we had a ceremony together over Zoom, and I had even the grandchildren stay there and participate in it. And I gave them their names. I mean, I didn't give them their names yet, but I wanted them to be in on it and know what it meant. And we it was just very, very special. And then I think it was a couple months later we did the naming of the grandchildren. And we of course I did research again, and Kira, I can't remember even what I named her.
Reindeer?
No, Kira is she's a trumpeter swan.
Oh,
but
that's right.
I'm sorry, I can't even remember the name right now.
Uhoyuq.
Ahoyuk?
Uhoyuq.
Ahoyuk. And to me that was kind of a temporary name, because I want to pass down my name of Pukisqaq to her, because she's a very wise young woman, and my grandson Ethan, that was pretty easy for me to come up with. First I was going to name him Tunduk, but he's so special and such a gift to me that I decided to give him the name of Pikiyutak, which means, I hope I pronounced that right, means a gift, because he's such a gift to me. And with Emmy, it was really kind of hard at first, because she's quite young, so her name may change through the years, who knows. Even her mom could add a name to it, but I pronouncing her name, she's the ground squirrel, right? Quyannasinaq. Anyway, she's so busy and just all over the place, always gathering stuff and saving stuff and everything like that. And
it fits her perfectly.
It just fits her perfectly right now with her personality. So anyway, that's how I came up with her name. So we had another Zoom with all of us on it again to have that ceremony to name the grandchildren. And it was just also very special and just meant a lot to us. So that's my story.
Awesome.
Okay.
Chimay, my name is Tanya Lukeen Linklater. I'm Alutiiq or Sugpiaq from the native villages of Afognak and Port Lions on Kodiak Island in southwestern Alaska. I'm sharing a little bit today about Alutiiq names, and I'm grateful that Jessica invited me to contribute to this. So I don't have an Alutiiq name or Sugpiaq name. That makes me kind of sad. I wish I did have one. But I did want to share a little bit about names because myself and my children and my spouse, we all have names in Anishinaabemowin or Cree. And, you know, I think it's really important to have names. I was named a long time ago when I was pretty young. By the late Peter O'Cheese in a law lodge ceremony in the Rocky Mountains. I'm really grateful to have that name, and I've been thinking a lot about how names can become a philosophy of life and a way for us to organize or guide our actions. There's meaning involved in a name, and it's something that's important in terms of our life journey. So I'm grateful to have the name that I have. I've been told not to necessarily share that too widely, so that's why I'm not going to say it here, because this is going to be on the internet. But I think it's really important that we continue naming practices, because what they do is they're really rooted in who we are as Alutiiq people or Sugpiaq people, or in my case, I've been lucky to have been a name shared with me, or that's been given to me from the late Anishinaabe elder. So I guess the thing that I would encourage people to do is continue naming practices, or also to recover those naming practices, and to really bring them forward in their life if they can, if they have the opportunity to, because it's something that can be really special and really help you on your journey. So I think that's all I want to say, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to share a little bit, and I just want to say Quyanaa to Jessica and the other folks who are also participating in this video about Alutiiq naming, and I look forward to seeing what everyone else has shared as well. Quyanaa.
Chimay, Updachatna Kongyungjuk. I'm Natalia Schneider, and my Alutiiq name is Kongyungjuk, which means little wave. My Alutiiq name was given to me from Dennis and Julie Kanagan. It was one year when I was out at Digafognak. They put that name together, and I think it's really important for everyone to gain a relationship with elders, and it's a really good way to start on your journey of getting a name.
Chimay, my name's Jessica Towns Kamara. My family is from Pilot Point, Alaska, and my Alutiiq name is Palista, and that means one who makes, because I really like to make things. You know, we started our naming journey. It felt like an important step in our journey to dig down into our culture. And so it started to just be something that was in our hearts. And I did a lot of research, and we, there's all kinds of ways of naming, and different ways, like you can name people after animals that seem symbolic of them, and just so many different things. So anyway, we looked for names that we thought were appropriate for each other, because we don't have elders left in our family to bestow names. And so we decided that in order to wake this up, we needed to do this ourselves. So that way it then becomes more natural and more organic as the generations go on. So that way when we name our kids, then hopefully they'll just, name their kids, or we can help them name their kids as more kids are born. And so, we looked into the names and we thought, okay, here's some concepts that we think are pretty good. And we didn't really know, are these good? Are these acceptable? And so I wrote to the Alutiiq Museum, and Dehrich Chya at the Alutiiq Museum, who's in the panel discussion, he gave a lot of really wonderful, great feedback about whether it was appropriate or not appropriate, or, oh, here's how you can change a verb and make it into a name so that it's more appropriate for naming someone. And yeah, there was just a few back and forths with Dehrich, and then we were able to kind of land on some names that felt really good. And I carved a nanik in preparation for a little just backyard. It was no big deal, we just sat in the backyard and the kids were there, and we just shared a little bit about what the names meant. And after we lit the nanik, and then that was that. And that was our naming story.
David. Dawi Duck. I looked up my name David in the Awani magazine, a Kodiak High School project put out by the students of the Kodiak Aleutian Regional High School, May 1976 edition. One of the articles showed names of people. D-U-E-D-U-K for David is from Perrysville. That's Dewey Duck. Then in a Facebook Messenger chat with Dehrich Chya, he came up with a spelling of T-A-W-I-T-A-Q for David, but said the same way, Dewey Duck. So David in Alutiiq is Dewey Duck.
Chimai, Chui, Heather Matrokin Cannon, and this is a naming story from our family. This is a newer naming story, and the naming story of my granddaughter, Madeline. When she was 3 years old, I really wanted to let her know that she belonged. She belonged to our family. She belonged to our culture. And so I consulted with my father, or her great-grandfather, to learn about what was occurring in our family about Alutiiq or Sugpiaq naming. Unfortunately, over the course of time, our knowledge was lost or replaced by knowledge about English or Russian naming instead. In fact, my grandfather, when I was a little girl, gave me a Russian nickname, not a formal name, but a nickname that he would call me. And I have great fond memories of that. But I really wanted my granddaughter, Madeline, to have a Sugpiaq name. And so I really looked at her character. She was such a loving and caring child. She was just playful all the time, loves to play, loves the water. From the time she was just an infant, 1, 2, 3 years old, she just loved water, was a very loving and also a very adventurous and resourceful child. And so through that, I decided, and her face was just, it's an adorably cute little face. And so I chose the name Ishwik, or seal, for her name, her Alutiiq Sugpiaq name. Now, of course, she can change that or gather new names as she gets older. But for the time being, that is what we call her at home, Ishwik. And we really just love her to pieces. And we're so happy she has an Alutiiq or Sugpiaq name. Quyanaa, thank you for joining us for this important event. And Quyannasinaq to Alisha, Dehrich, and Hanna for sharing your expertise with us. We'd also like to say Quyanaa to the Bristol Bay Native Corporation Education Foundation and to the Evergreen State College Longhouse Foundation for supporting this important event. We're glad you could join us.
We also want to say a special Quyanaa to Vicky Era and her daughters, Rana Miles Era and Brandy Era Miller, as well as Tanya Lucan Linklater, Natalia Schneider, and David Wayne Reddick for sharing their stories. We hope that this information empowers Sugpiaq people to learn more, create connections, and reawaken tradition and ceremony for our families and our community. Quyanaa.